What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Beginner Bike Giveaway series. If you've been watching, you saw that we announced our 3 new giveaway bikes. We've got this CB650R, we've got a Suzuki DRZ 400S, and a Kawasaki Ninja 400. But today, it's all about the CB650R because we're going to be taking it out on this road and doing some first impressions of it. First of all, let's just appreciate this motorcycle. Man, what a sweet looking machine. My favorite thing about this thing has to be the header pipes on it. As you'll notice, there are 4, which we will talk about why that makes this bike such a gem in my opinion. But before we continue, if you want the chance to win this motorcycle, the DRZ 400 or the Kawasaki Ninja 400, click the link below to pre-register for our giveaway. We actually have not started the sweepstakes officially just yet for these bikes. We're working on getting a website built out so you guys can keep track of your entries, earn additional chances to win by submitting in letters and sharing on social media. We're working on a lot of cool stuff, so hit the link below, pre-register for this giveaway. You're not going to want to miss it. That way you will be notified when it goes live and you can start entering for your chances to win. Existing patrons need not worry because you're not being billed for these episodes, and we are doing these for free until we start up our new series. So, without further ado, let's check this bike out. So today we're not going to be talking specs, we're not going to be talking, anything like that. What I really want to focus on is just kind of, what does it feel like when you jump on this thing and ride it? What's my first kind of thoughts around it? What am I feeling while I'm going down the road, and what's it like, I think the coolest thing about this bike, like I mentioned, these header pipes, but also the fact that Honda gives you the really cool little daytime LED running ring right there, LED turn signals. This bike just looks and feels super, super premium, which I think is so cool. The dash as well is a very nice, somewhat colored unit. I think when I first got it, I was kind of looking at it, I was like, oh cool, they made it colored, but what I think they did actually is it's just a regular kind of LCD dash, but with like red inserts, so it kind of feels colored. So I don't think it's actually colored, but it does look still really premium. And this bike, that's kind of the story behind it as far as I've been kind of riding it and checking it out, is it's weird because like you'd expect it to be, competing with the SV650 and the FZ07 because it is a 650cc motorcycle, but it kind of doesn't because it's so much nicer than those bikes, It has a nicer, refined quality to it. It's also much more expensive than those motorcycles. For example, the SV650 MSRP is, I think, $74.99. This bike's is $88.99, so you're paying about $1,200 more to get this motorcycle. I think out the door with this bike, you're pretty close to $10,000. So is it worth $10,000? Let's ride it and find out, shall we? Let's do the fun part. Actually, let's jump off and we'll get a nice little startup of it so you can hear it. It's got the stock pipe on it, so there's not really a whole lot to hear, but you'll still see if you can. Classic 4-cylinder sounds, really nice and smooth. Yeah, it's a special little bike, I think. Let's take it for a spin, shall we? Oh, also be sure to stick around for the end of this episode. We will be doing a little Q&A section in the garage powered by people on Patreon and asking them questions and all that, so let's get going. We're sort of in this back street right here, so we can kind of do a quick little acceleration test if you guys want. Of course you want, right? Certainly no slouch of a motorcycle. Pulls really nice and hard. I think it makes about 90 something horsepower at the peak. I can't remember exactly. And we're not talking specs today. We're just seeing how the bike feels and what it's like to ride. I think the thing I feel most about this bike taking it down the road is it just feels so sophisticated. And not like, you know, it's got a bunch of technology thrown at it, like everything in the kitchen sink and all that, but the way in which it rides feels very nice. That's about as much as I can kind of tell you with it. I don't know what it is about this bike, but between the suspension, the way it's put together, it just feels really special. And it's so nice taking it down these twisty roads. Honda actually set up the suspension pretty stiff from factory, honestly. This thing is pretty sporty, which I didn't expect it to be, given that it's a more upright. I thought it would be a little softer, kind of like the SV and the FC, but it's really not. It's quite stiff. If we're lucky, maybe I can take this thing out to a track day and see how it performs in closed conditions, because obviously, you know, here with traffic and on the street, we're not going to push it super hard, but it's still quite fun to just kind of chuck down a twisty road. The throttle response is surprisingly good too. I mean, I think that the takeaway from it is, you know, given that it's a 4-cylinder, it just exudes this kind of smoothness to it. You know, it's extremely smooth. The downshifts are extra smooth as well. Get into first here, no problem. I think the big thing that people think about as well is because it's a 650cc 4-cylinder, you know, I think this bike confuses a lot of people because they see CB650 and they're like, oh, okay, so it's like a Ninja 650 or an SV650, and it's really not. This bike is not like those bikes at all. This bike, in terms of its power, in terms of its quality and fit and finish, in my opinion, competes much more closely with something like an FC09 or a Ninja 900, but I think it really makes the case for the old school kind of, you know, Street Fighter 600 class bike. And given you have the extra 50 cc's and it doesn't rev as high as a normal 600, like, it's kind of in a class of its own in a way. And at first when I saw this motorcycle, I actually saw it at EICMA 2018 last year in Milan, and I was kind of like, well, what's Honda really trying to do with this bike? I mean, it looks amazing. This bike looks so good. You just cannot even deny that. But I was kind of like, where does it slot in? And it doesn't really slot in anywhere, in my opinion. Because the way it goes down the road is completely different than something like the SV or the FZ07. This bike doesn't feel budget at all. And the FC and the SV, as fun as they are, you know, they feel plasticky. They feel kind of like you can, like, I wouldn't really care about dropping an FZ07, to be honest. Like, if you're a new rider and you're in a parking lot and you kind of dip the bike a little bit down, it's not the end of the world. But with this thing, I would feel particularly bad about dropping it. It's quite nice. It's, you know, all the little, like, touches on it are really special, I think. Like the powder-coated bar here, the bronze accents on the engine case covers. It's a motorcycle that kind of tells the world, hey, like, this is a nice bike, you know? I mean, it's a shame we're stuck behind this car. It's a really rewarding engine to ride. I'm telling you, man, you rev this thing out, it feels like your classic inline 4-cylinder kind of vibes. It's got, in my opinion, like, plenty of torque to have fun with. It does have a weird little dip between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM. I kind of want to check that again. So we'll be here in third. Yeah, it's really kind of, there's a tiny little dip somewhere in the mid-range. I want to see a dyno graph of this bike and see if that confirms my suspicions, because it does feel a little strange right there. But if you're riding this thing in anger, you're usually, you know, revving it probably past 6,000 RPM, so I don't think you'd really notice. Like right here, you just kind of... it really picks up and goes. This thing's great. That's why I was kind of saying it's not really like an SV650 or an FZ07. I think it's a shame that this thing's getting kind of lumped in with those bikes, because it's not like that at all. it's quite a performance machine, actually. I really wouldn't feel comfortable recommending this to a beginner, to be honest. I think you could ride any bike as a beginner, but this is not the best choice. This bike is actually quite quick. But the good thing is, because it's a 4-cylinder, even if you whack the throttle low down, it's not going to do too much, you know. I'll take it through this little twisty section here. But yeah, a real supple, really enjoyable motorcycle to just hustle down these twisty roads. It rewards really, really precise inputs. That's kind of what I'm noticing. The brakes are great. The brakes are really good. A really welcome change over those squishy Takikos that the Suzuki SV650 has. They're really nice on this bike. Really good feedback. Like, look at that. This bike really goes, man. It really hustles, doesn't it? Being purposefully tough with the inputs there, just to see what it would kind of do. And it's really stable. This bike is so stable. Let's rip it out here a little bit. Let's see what it does. So yeah, it's geared really differently than a traditional 600, because it's not a traditional 600. It's a 650 street-tuned engine, revs to only about 12,000, 11,500. So you're not going to be banging off 15, 16,000 RPMs on this thing like you would on a 600. But that, to me, makes it perfect, honestly. If you're looking for, you know, 4-cylinder kind of fun, but in a package that is modern and isn't some gigantic engine, this is your bike. This is the bike to have, I think. This bike allows you to have a lot of fun with a 4-cylinder engine without feeling like you're gonna go to jail every 5 seconds, you know? I mean, certainly you can ride this bike in anger and find yourself doing triple-digit speeds, but you really have to look for it. It's not a bike where you're gonna accidentally look down and be like, oh, I'm doing 110 miles per hour. You'll know when you're doing 110 because you made it go 110. What a machine. This thing is so sweet. I know I like this thing because before starting this video, I had to go get some food because I don't like vlogging on an empty stomach. I feel like my brain doesn't work right. And I just, as soon as I got off, I looked back, it looks cool. And the first thing I thought of, I was like, oh man, I want to like hurry up and eat so I can get back on this bike and go ride. It has such a playful nature to it that you really want to have fun with it and ride it and enjoy it. Like, I don't really want to stop riding this thing. It's so sweet. There is a definite dip in torque somewhere in the middle there. I really want to see this thing on a graph. Alrighty guys, we're stuck behind some traffic now, but those are my like real early first impressions of this bike. We're now going to go into the garage and answer some questions via Patreon and Discord and see what y'all want to know about it. As always, if you want to join that, feel free to hit the links below on Patreon and pre-register for our next giveaway as well, so I know that you guys are interested and I can email you about it when it's ready to go and all that. And we'll catch you in the garage. See you in a bit.
Okay, recording. Alrighty guys, we're now back in the garage with the CB650R. Hell of a bike, a peach of a bike if I may say so myself, but we're gonna see what the folks on Patreon wanted to know about it, so let's get into that. Name McKins asks, what's the first mod you're gonna do to this bike? So, long-time viewers of the channel know that our giveaway bikes, I almost always go for tank grips, frame sliders, case sliders, that sort of thing. This bike's in desperate need of some tank grips, to be honest. I find myself sliding right off of it when I'm kind of having some fun with it and cornering it, especially under braking. Even though Honda does supply you with a bit of a grippy material right here, it's not enough and it's not as nice as the tech spec, so tank grips for sure, number one. Mitch Stovall asks, what's your favorite thing about this bike? I have to say, I've only ridden it maybe like 20 miles or so, but my favorite thing so far is just how smooth it is. Inline 4-cylinder fun, it's just so smooth and nice and predictable. The power band is really fun to play with. That's probably my favorite thing. I've never owned an inline 4-cylinder bike before. I own the Hentai Hornet, which is, I mean, I rode that like once, unfortunately, but this is my first kind of like longer term inline 4-cylinder bike, and it's a lot of fun. Karoom says that bike is fire emoji. Pretty cool. Luke asks, why did you choose this bike over others? And then Levi correctly answered that I don't choose the bikes, I actually give patrons choices for the bikes that we vote on. So patrons actually voted for this motorcycle. I had no choice in it. That's why we ended up with the Ninja 400, because I had no choice in it. But we do have the CB650 as our patron bike. But then Luke asks, I know that I was regarding his choice between the other new bikes in the garage. I guess he means like, why did I choose this for today's video? I don't know, I felt like riding the CB. It seemed cool, so I jumped on. I didn't really give it too much thought. Valentino Correa asks, how does it compare to the SV650, pros and cons? So there's gonna be a whole video comparing it to the SV650. I'm hoping that we can do that before I ship off the SV650 to its new winner, which I'm filming this the day that we're picking the winners for the R3 and the SV, but you guys aren't probably gonna see this video until way later. But yeah, so hopefully we can do a full comparison, because there's a lot to discuss and I can't do it all in one question. Hector says, what makes this bike unique / better over other motorcycles in its class? And that's a huge point about this bike. It doesn't really fit in any class, really. It's too nice to compare to the FZ07 and the SV650 and the Ninja 650. It's a super nice motorcycle. It also costs a good $2,000 more than those bikes. But it also doesn't quite compete in terms of pure power output and performance with something like the FZ09 or the Ninja 900 or the Suzuki GSX 750. This bike's kind of in its weird own little class, and I think it really benefits from that. I think it gives you all the fun you could want in a 4-cylinder bike without any of the crazy top-end rush if you're a newer rider. It really provides you with ample room to grow and have fun with, and I'm having a blast with this thing. I think it's a great motorcycle. Gene asks, is it a ton lots better than everything else, or just regular better than everything else? I'm gonna say it's just regular better than everything else, if I understand the question. Mark says, awesome, I think that's my fave of the 3. The Suzuki is my favorite just because I want to try dual sport bikes out, but this thing is a close second. As everyone knows, I'm not super fond of the Ninja 400, but we will get into that in a later video. Tough Toy Tryouts asks, will you consider a full exhaust replacement instead of a slip-on? I'd love to see this struggle. Probably not, because the ethos behind this motorcycle is, if I were a newer rider or a new rider, what would I do to it? And I probably wouldn't mess around with the fuel controller and a full exhaust and spend like $1,800 to do all that. So it's gonna be a slip-on pipe for the old CB over here. I'm seeing that there's a giant catalytic converter back here, and I'm hoping that that all comes out and then we just slide the new one in, but we'll see. Or maybe there are no options and you have to go for full system. I don't know. Ben asks, is this bike heavy? It's kind of heavy. I don't really know how much it weighs. I haven't deep dived into the specs yet. Today was just a super basic first impressions video of it, but it does feel meaty. It feels weighty. It feels solid. So I'm guessing it probably weighs a good 450, 460 pounds if I were to guess, but it does feel quite weighty. Cruiser Reno asks, it'd be awesome to hear about the difference in the acceleration / driving characteristics of the SV650 twin in the SV and the 650i4 in the CB. Yes, we will get into that in the comparison video. It's too much to talk about in this one video. Today's just kind of a first impressions, but we are gonna make it. Linux-powered communism, very funny name, asks, how are the ergos? What about the clutch weight and brake pull? Ergos are pretty relaxed. It's a little more lean forward than you would expect. It's not as uprated as the SV650, but it is pretty canted forward, but nothing that you couldn't ride for all day long. If you just sit a little bit more up and just kind of keep your hand up, it's perfectly fine. You can really kind of tuck into it too, which is kind of cool. It's a good balance between the two. Clutch weight and brake pull, it's got a really light clutch pull, really solid firm brake feel. These Nissan calipers on this bike are by far class leading in the 650 kind of segment. They're way better than the SV650. They're way better than the FZ07. These brake calipers are sick. I really like them. Linux Powered Communism also asks, how is the clearance in corners? I'm not really sure if I understand. Are you perhaps they're speaking of like the pegs, are they going to touch the ground or anything like that? I don't have any issues. I haven't scraped any pegs on it or anything. The clearance is pretty good. I can't imagine you'd have any issues with this riding at a normal kind of street pace. If you were on track, you'd probably start scraping some parts pretty quick on this thing. Aaron Rutz says, on a scale of mobility scooter to Turbo Busa, how dank of a nooner could the average aspiring street Rossi hope to achieve on the CB650R? Asking for a friend. That's very good. This thing will probably wheelie really easily, honestly. It's set up with a good amount of torque, nice upright seating position. I'm notoriously bad at wheelies. I've never really figured them out. All I can do is kind of like pop the clutch a little bit and kind of ride them out on a good day on the right bike. The best wheelie I ever did was on my FZ09, and I did it in a parking lot once. So I'm not the guy to ask about wheelies, to be honest, but I'm sure this thing, I mean, anything can wheelie super well, but this thing especially, I'm guaranteeing you can wheelie super easily. Kyle Marler asks, how does the throttle feel? Snappy or slow? Can it do mega dank nooners? Will I feel like a street Rossi on it? All jokes aside, looking forward to the video. Thanks, Kyle. The throttle is... It's weird because like when you've completely come off it and back on it, it can feel somewhat snatchy. The 100% off, 100% on throttle feels a little snatchy. But when you're like modulating throttle and adding more, let's say mid corner or goosing out of a corner, super linear, super nice. Definitely something I could live with. But the on off isn't as smooth as I'd like. It's not the best thing in the world. Corey Liu asks, how much do you pay for insurance having all these bikes? It's surprisingly not that much, honestly. It's a lot less than you would imagine. Michael Smith asks, are you going to Cafe Racer modded? Probably not. I think this bike is so good from factory. I wouldn't really want to, mess with it too much. It really is really good out of the box. I think it would be a shame to molest it or modify it in that way, truthfully. Stephen asks, what type of power do you get with an inline 4 versus a V-twin or other engine configurations? We're going to discuss that in the SV650 versus this bike video, but basically like the torque of the V-twin, it hits harder and it's linear and just kind of tapers like this, whereas this bike builds in power, gives you a little more to work with at the top end and just kind of like gradually builds steam as you kind of push it a little bit more. Also, it sounds cooler in my opinion, stock versus stock, but the SV650 sounds cool with an exhaust on it, I will say. Carpel asks, how smooth is the engine? It is super smooth. It's crazy how smooth it is, honestly. Jeff asks, how does it compare to the MT-07? Gonna cover that in another video. Robert says, how's the torque and power feel through the RPM range compared to the SV650 FZ07? We're going to talk about that. You guys had a lot of questions about that. FZ07 comparison. Jared asks, have you ridden any of the 70s CB550 or CB750s? I'm curious to know how the engine feedback, I assume hum, and bark compare with the vintage inline 4s. I have ridden a couple classic inline 4s. I've even ridden like an RVF 400 in Australia. Those just end up feeling a little more raw because they're carbureted, they're old school, they have a bit more of like a kind of, I don't know, there's something a little more raw about them, but this bike has a lot of that lineage about it. It definitely feels like a bike that kind of came from the past and updated into the future without changing too much. I personally think that this class of bike, like the smaller displacement inline 4 street bike, is sorely missing. You used to have tons of bikes like this, like 10, 20 years ago. You had like the FZ6 and those kinds of bikes. But now this is kind of the only game in town in terms of small inline 4 cylinder street focused motorcycles. Doesn't really have too much of a comparison. Jugal asks, how does the ride feel compared to the FC650? We're going to talk about that. Danny Brooks asks, curious since they're the same displacement, but how's the throttling compared to the SV? So again, I'm stoked that you guys are so excited to compare the two, because I am too. I think there's a lot to talk about. But in short, the throttle on this is much nicer than the SV. You guys know that I personally don't really care for the SV's throttle that much. I find it to be kind of snappy, not so great. So this one I think is a lot better. And the last question is from Ryan Velton. He asks, what was your least favorite thing about the bike when you first rode it? I don't know. I was really enamored with the bike when I first got on it. I think it just works really, really well. If I had to really nitpick something, it would be that with a tinted visor on, without direct sunlight, the dash is a little tough to read, but that's like such a minor nitpick. I haven't really found things I don't like with this bike yet. I really, really enjoy it so far. So that's the questions for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you click the link below and pre-register for our sweepstakes, you'll be notified of when you'll be able to enter to win one of these 3 motorcycles. We are in the process of building a new website that will allow you to track your entries and will let you see the bikes we're working on. And it's just going to be a little more streamlined than what we're doing right now, but that's going to take some time to build out. So if you want to be notified of that, hit the link below, pre-register for our sweepstakes, and you'll get an email when we're ready to go, and you can sign up for free or enter to win as well. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Tune in next time, and I will see you later.